All right, well, everyone, welcome to our very first webinar for the Motherwell Online. We're so excited to welcome Dr. Julie Logan to this webinar and to our community. She brings such a wealth of knowledge and background, both personal and professional. In my own life, she has been very, very influential, where I watched her just dig into nutrition and therapies with her own family. And then I ended up bringing her my own son whenever he was going through some very severe and scary medical situations. And she just would not stop until she got the answers that we needed in order to get him treatment, and for doctors to see what we were dealing with. So Julie, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. And I'm excited to hear a little bit about you and would love to hear your perspective on pregnancy and childhood and how you've used that in your life.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rebecca. And just a kind of a fun side note before I dig in. Rebecca knew my kids when they were probably obnoxious brats because she was supervising the children's ministry and they were part of it in middle school, I think. Is that
Yeah.
right, Rebecca?
Yeah.
Was that the age? Yeah. So
Yeah.
if someone has perspective on my parenting lacks, it would be Rebecca. So anyway, I'm going to quick try to minimize the bar here. Okay, there we go. Now I can see my slide. So we're going to go ahead and get into this super, super important topic. If I was able to see my audience in person, I would want to know how many of you are pregnant, how many of you have kids, and how many of you have kids who have any kind of a health problem, just so I would get a better idea of who I'm talking to. But I know that this presentation is going to be recorded and that it's going to be shared to a diverse audience. So we could be speaking to any one of that category list there in the future. So we'll go ahead and get in. I think because we all are aware that there are a lot of serious issues that are facing us with children's health, with pregnancy health, with our own health as women, that we want to know if there's anything we can do to make ourselves better, to improve our odds. So this presentation was created to help us all understand that we do have things that we can do that can help shape not just a moment, but a lifelong health development, immunity, and resilience and protection against some of the problems that are most common for our kids. So we're going to look at a whole bunch of things from environmental exposures to lifestyle habits and see how they can affect maternal wellness, wellness during pregnancy, health of the infant, and health of the child. So who am I? I am a somewhat unusual doctor of chiropractic with advanced training in certain areas that are very specialized. I hold a fellowship through Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs, also known as MAPS or MedMaps. And that is the organization that trains healthcare providers around the world to deal with children who have developmental needs, and such as autism, ADHD, serious immune disorders, and other types of confusing, mysterious, but common illnesses. So the goal is to figure out what are the root causes of these complex chronic health issues for children and then also for adults as well. I've been an educator for almost 20 years with the Autism Community in Action, with MAPS, and with the National Autism Association and some others. And a lot of that is to help bring awareness to families that, one, there's hope. Two, there are a bunch of things they can be doing, should be doing. And three, sometimes to dispel maybe some, I don't want to use the word misinformation per se, but just maybe lack of understanding around some of these topics. So my practice today is focused primarily on children with special needs, but also with adults, because the same things that are making kids sick are making us sick too. And as I get older, I realize that, hey, guess what? Our bodies change. We think we've got it. We're healthy for a while, and then things change. The whole playing field changes out from under you. But in everything, I'm looking at a root cause approach, asking the question, why are we seeing the problems that we're seeing, and what can we do about them? So, Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, if any of you or have a child yourself or know of someone who has a child with developmental delay or a complex chronic illness, This is the body that teaches practitioners of all different types and licenses how to care for them. So generally, you would want to seek out a doctor who is MAPS trained because they're going to be approaching your child from a functional medicine perspective, regardless of whether they're a medical doctor or a nurse or a dietitian, a chiropractor. It doesn't matter. Everyone needs to be informed that we're looking at underlying health conditions with these kiddos. So, just to disclaim for a moment, I'm not giving anyone specific medical advice, nor am I telling you how to treat any condition. This is an educational presentation, and you obviously need to consult with your own doctor if you have a question about your health or about your kids' health. So, let's talk about maternal nutrition to start. And in 2014, there was an organization called the P to I Initiative that was formed. And P to I was a spin-off of MAPS. And the reason was because people like me and like others were saying, you know what, here we are picking up broken pieces of kids who have gone astray in the health journey. But what would happen if we could stop it from happening in the first place? What would it take? What would that look like? What are the things that go into it that are controllable and preventable? And so the P to I initiative looks at pregnancy as a critical window where nutrition and lifestyle choices may significantly influence lifelong health for both mother and child. And so understanding that the mother is the environment of the infant until birth, and that a lot of research and a lot of clinical understanding is starting to realize that when a mother is exposed to toxins and nutritional deficiencies before conception and during pregnancy, it will have an impact on her child's health, and possibly it can have a lifelong impact on the child's health. And so the P to I initiative was born out of that. So from that, the problem that they identified that they were addressing were unsafe pregnancies and unhealthy children. These are some of the statistics from 2014. I would guess that things haven't gotten better, but we'll start with this. It's just kind of a baseline. So when a woman conceives, she has a 31% chance of a miscarriage. That's 1/3 of women have a chance of a miscarriage, or 1/3 of pregnancies. 12% chance of the child being born preterm, which may result in lifelong health problems. Greater than 30% chance of having a child with a severe allergy, chronic neurologic, or developmental disorder. Many chronic conditions are caused by exposure to toxins and insufficient nutrition during gestation and early infancy. And these problems include cancer, which is now the second leading cause of death in children. In case you want to know the first, it's accidents and like accidental injuries. Asthma, severe allergies, developmental and neurologic disorders, and diabetes are very common. And many of the children who are affected with these things are going to also have lower IQ than unaffected children, which means that their prospects going into high school and adulthood are going to be affected. So the economic impacts are the cost of caring for these young ones exceeded $500 billion. This is in 2014. I can't imagine what that number is today. Of course, it is rising. Also, the loss of skilled workforce and problems with independent living as parents age. So here are some statistics of chronic childhood disease. And I like to compare things to 1980. And I don't know why, just because the rock music was good in that year, or because it seems like it was a time before this wave really started to rise and then to crest. So in 1980, the autism rate was 1 in 10,000. It is now 1 in 31 as of 2024 and predicted to escalate even more quickly. Asthma was 1 in 33, now 1 in 12. Food allergies, 1 in 100 in 1980, now 1 in 5 in 2022. Autoimmunity, 1 in 12 now, was 1 in 36. And diabetes type 1, which is the autoimmune type of diabetes, which is usually diagnosed in childhood, was 1 in 39 and is now 1 in 14. And that is, I could not find a later statistic, so that's from 2015. Learning disabilities, this is 2022. 11.4% of all children have a diagnosis of ADHD, which is 1 in 9 kids, or 7 million children as of 2022. Boys account for 66% of kids with a learning disability. And when you think of the fact that the world generally still has men providing as the main provider income wise for their family. This isn't true in every case, but it is often the case, especially women, as we are the ones home having babies and needing to take care of these babies. We may be out of the workforce. So we rely upon our husbands and the fathers of our children to take care of us financially. But boys are the ones being affected in disproportionate numbers by these learning disabilities, which can have the potential to affect their earning income potential later on. Almost 50% of these children with ADHD are medicated, and this is the staggering truth that almost 80% have a co-occurring medical disorder. And that is where I focus and the MAPS doctors focus is what are those medical conditions that are resulting in the symptoms that the kids are having that are affecting their executive function. The three most common learning disabilities found in American children are ADHD, dyslexia, and dysgraphia, which is the inability to read and the inability to write. Now, I realize that some of what I'm talking about may be somewhat scary. Forgive me for scaring you in the beginning. I'm going to be giving you tools to deal with it here as we get to the middle part and end of the conversation. So what I want you to do is we're not really going to read every word on these slides. I want you to see the shape. Look at the shape of these trends. This is autism plotted against glyphosate use. And notice the shape that you see. It's rising very fast. This is autism compared against other environmental factors. And I don't know what those environmental factors are in this particular comparison here, but you can see that the shape of the trend is the same, rising and rising fast. Autism statistics. This is from National Autism Association. Autism is the fastest growing developmental disorder. It affects 1 in 31 kids, which is a 500% increase since the year 2000. Boys, again, are 4 to 5 times more likely to have autism than girls. So if you're a boy, your chance is 1 in 12. About 40% of children with autism do not speak. However, children with autism do progress. Early intervention is key. Autism is treatable, it's not a hopeless condition. And with some of the things I'm hoping to provide to you today, we have some tools that we can use to make it even less likely. Around 2024, maybe early 2025, I believe the CDC shifted the developmental milestones for babies. Now, before this, for all of human existence, the developmental milestones had been known to happen at certain times. So the fact that the CDC is shifting those is not because it's a good thing. It's because it's representing the reality of what's actually happening, that our kids are not meeting developmental milestones as quickly as they should. So in 1980, we had social smile at 6 weeks to 2 months, rolling over 4 months, sitting without support around 6 months, saying a few words 12 months, and 2-word phrases around 24 months. But you can look for yourself and see that these things have been pushed to later in life. Now, there are some problems with that. One, it represents a norm that is not healthy and is not desirable. We don't want to accept this. Number two, though, it means that if they've shifted the criteria, that a child will not meet the criteria to help them now until much later. And the problem with that is that the longer we wait to intervene, the worse the outcome. So we want to get on it sooner and as soon as possible. So this, even though it represents possibly the norm, it is not a good thing. And it means that people are not going to be getting the help they need when they need it. So food allergies are a huge epidemic. I'm not going to go over this slide, but many of you already know this. Here's hospitalizations per 100,000 with anaphylaxis. And it's interesting that the steepest line on this whole chart is Australia. And Australia must be have something going on here, but there's a lot of anaphylaxis going on in Australia. And this again is not so much affecting our kids, it's affecting more of us, the moms, the women, and you can see again, take a look at the shape. Everything is skyrocketing. So, what's making our children sick? This is a phenomenal book for those of you that are interested, and it's talking about the chemical exposure from industrial food and how it's causing a lot of chronic illnesses. It also gives you tools for what you can do to change that. And here again are some statistics that I'm not going to go through with you because this is going to be recorded and you'll have access to this presentation. But it is definitely a good book if you're looking to understand how is it that environmental changes and food changes are affecting the health of our kids today. So I think this is my last slide of scary pictures, but this is glyphosate. This is Roundup, in case anyone doesn't know what glyphosate is. It's the active ingredient in herbicides. You spray it to kill weeds on crops. But you can just take a look and see the difference in agricultural use. And this one on the right here is 2015. That was 11 years ago. I can't imagine that it's gotten any less. So we're going to take a turn now that I've scared you, and I'm sorry for doing that. We're going to talk about what are the biggest risks that women who are either pregnant or contemplating pregnancy should be aware of. It's good to know your enemies. So number one is miscarriage. This is the most common risk that expecting mothers face. Miscarriage, of course, being the total loss of the pregnancy. 1 in 5 recognized pregnancies ends in miscarriage. 1 in 3 potentially if they count very early implantation losses, and this would be a loss before a person even knew that they were pregnant. The top causes are chromosomal abnormalities, and some say you can't do anything about that, but some of us believe that toxic exposure is affecting the chromosomes and the way that they are being replicated. Hormonal and metabolic disorders can cause loss of pregnancy, inflammatory and autoimmune states, environmental toxins, infections, and then uterine and placental abnormalities all are top contributors to this very, very tragic occurrence. Second risk to expectant mothers is preterm birth. So, this is one of the leading causes both of infant mortality, but also long term disability in the United States. So, babies born prematurely have a risk of a whole host of health problems. And I actually, again, I'm seeing mostly children with developmental disorders in my practice, but a lot of them have preterm birth as a history. They come into the world before they're ready for it. And often their bodies are treated medically as if they were full term when they're not. And so there can be long term problems in body systems, but there can also be long term problems in neurologic development. The CDC reports that about 10.4% of US births are preterm, and that preterm birth and low birth weight account for 14% of infant deaths. The wonderful thing is that we're able to save children's lives now that are born very early where we weren't before. So that is the wonderful thing. Obviously, the risk is that there's going to be a consequence to them. So some of what we talk about is going to be aimed today at how can we reduce the chances of that. So number 3 is maternal hypertension and preeclampsia. Preeclampsia and eclampsia are hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. These are extremely dangerous complications for mother and baby. And if you've ever been pregnant, your doctors have talked to you about this. It's something that can happen. Generally, it starts to happen towards the later stages of pregnancy, and it can kill a woman very quickly, and it can kill the baby too, as well. So risk factors include chronic hypertension, gestational hypertension, which can then lead to the preeclampsia and eclampsia. So this affects roughly 3 to 7% of pregnancies. And when it does, it can cause the mother to die. It can cause the child to die. And it can cause, if it's happening before the baby is ready to be born, it can cause problems that can lead to the baby having to be taken early, which again that leads then to the issues that are ongoing with the child. Risk factors, and these are where we have some control because these are modifiable. Risk factors include maternal metabolic syndrome, so obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease and chronic inflammation, and an older maternal age. Now, does this mean that people who have these conditions shouldn't become pregnant? Absolutely not. It just means that if you have any of these conditions and you also want to become pregnant, that you need to be on your game when it comes to implementing all of the best things to maximize your chances of having a healthy child. So the overall pattern in the US has shifted. So 100 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago, and then back through history, infectious diseases were the main threat. Today, their infectious diseases are far less likely to threaten pregnancy outcomes in the US. Today, the largest contributors are chronic inflammatory conditions, hypertension, and placental dysfunction. So, going back to that preeclampsia issue, premature birth, maternal obesity, metabolic disease, and diabetes, environmental and lifestyle factors, and gaps in prenatal care and social support. Now, it is outside of the scope of this talk for me to talk about the impact of poverty, of starvation, of war, of being a single mom, being an immigrant, for example, and having bad health care overall. I know those things are very true, and that's not what this talk is aimed for, although someone else should definitely talk about it. So, now we've talked about the leading risk of pregnancy loss in mothers in the US. Now we're talking about the leading causes of infant death in the US. And according to the CDC, the top causes of infant mortality are birth defects, preterm birth and low birth weight, sudden infant death syndrome, accidents and injuries, and then, of course, maternal pregnancy complications. We don't want any of these. So again, knowing our enemies is super important. What are the biggest risks to growing children? You've had your baby, you've made it through pregnancy, and the baby's made it out. What are the risks to the growing children? Well, developmental disabilities overall affect roughly 17 out of every 100 children in the US. By contrast, infectious disease causing death in children is less than 1 in 10,000 annually. You are far, far, far more likely to deal with a developmental disorder than you are death by an infectious disease. And therefore, our attention should be on developmental disorders and how to prevent them and treat kids as soon as they show the first sign rather than on worrying so much about preventing infectious disease. So historically, infectious diseases were once the dominant cause of childhood death and disability in America. So it's not wrong that that would have been a focus, but it isn't the issue today. Today, chronic neurodevelopmental, behavioral, and learning disorders count for a much larger share of long-term pediatric morbidity. And that leads to educational disability, and it leads to workforce disability and everything else that comes after that. So this shift is one of the major epidemiologic changes in modern pediatrics. So we need to be asking ourselves why. What are the impediments to normal brain development in our children today? We're going to get into some of that. So, what are some of the underlying health conditions associated with chronic and developmental disorders? This is the focus of MAPS trained doctors or functional medical doctors. So, toxic burden, chemicals, toxic metals, mold exposure, pesticide exposure, probably all falls under chemicals, pollutants, etc. Infections are a big one too, viral, bacterial, and vector-borne. Vector-borne means insect bites, so ticks, mosquitoes, etc. Poor nutrient status leads to its own problems, but also the inability to properly address the problems above. Neuroinflammation is the product of this constellation of factors, which means we have a dysregulated immune response, autoimmunity, allergic reactions, etc. We have poor barrier defense against microbes, which means things can make their way in and the body can't resist, decreased detoxification capacity, and abnormal formation and pruning of synapses and connections in the brain. So when we're born, a baby actually has way too many connections. It's not specialized at all. And over time, as development happens, the brain will prune some of these connections and it will become increasingly specialized and it will get rid of the extra. Well, when a child, they've seen, I believe this was a 2022 very large study, that kids with autism don't prune properly. So they have too much noise going on and not enough specialization. On the other side, that certain toxic chemicals will cause pruning of connections that should be there. So we lose some connections that should be there, and then we have a whole bunch that shouldn't be there. And so the resulting situation leads to the poor function of the brain in certain areas. So what can you do about all this? You're probably very glad I'm finally getting to this part. So here, this is a synopsis, and we're about to dive a bit deeper. So number one, eat as clean as you can. Eat organic, grow your own food if you can. Use safe personal and cleaning products. Get rid of the chemical cleaners. Use vinegar and water for crying out loud. Use regular soap. Get rid of stuff that smells good, stuff that you spray around in the air. Reduce exposure to environments with heavy toxic load. What might this be? It could be a workplace. It could be a garage where there are tons of chemicals. It could be out pushing a lawnmower and breathing the fumes. I hate to say it, but in my current situation, I get to drive a tractor. I don't hate to say it at all. I love to drive my tractor. However, the diesel fumes that come up into my face from that they're not safe at all, but they definitely wouldn't be a good idea if you were carrying a baby. Do not use pesticides and herbicides on your property or in your home. Choose natural fibers and textiles and avoid inhalants such as burning candles, plug-ins, and scented products. So it's okay if it's a soy candle or a beeswax candle, if it's scented with essential oils, that's fine. But anything that Glade makes or that you get at Walmart or Target or Bed Bath and Beyond, that stuff, those are neurotoxins, and they're toxins for mom, for dad, and for the animals, as well as for the baby. Mothers to be, boost your nutrient status and avoid drugs, synthetic chemicals, and additives in food and medicine unless absolutely required. Think of your child's body as a construction site. It is helpful to think of pregnancy as a construction job, and you want to build the most beautiful, amazing, healthy body possible because it will be lived in for a long time. But here's the thing, you can't control the builders, you can't tell them what to do. They use whatever is at hand. All you can control is the material that you bring to this site and whether or not you can clean that site up as much as possible so no garbage ends up in the final building. So if you think of it that way, it helps. This now is a document that I'm going to be using as a foundation for the rest of my presentation. The Neurological Health Foundation is again founded by some of the MAPS doctors, some different ones than the ones that founded the P to I initiative. And what these guys did was they took on the phrase that a lot of you may have heard when talking to your pediatrician, something to the effect of, there's no research about that. There's no studies that prove that. There are no studies that link that. Well, first of all, when you hear a pediatrician or anyone else say there's no research, what that means is probably just, I haven't read it. The other thing it might mean is, I know it's out there, but I'm hoping that you haven't read it. Either way, it generally doesn't mean that there actually isn't any research. There's quite a bit of research, in fact, on many, many different subjects. So this document here, which I will share to Rebecca and she can make available to you, is about, I think it's somewhere maybe close to 20 pages that basically compiles the research. So the highest evidence grade is grade A evidence. That is studies of studies. So you can take a study and you can study 100 people. Well, now what if you take 100 studies that studied 100 people and you draw conclusions from that? That's called a meta-analysis, and that's the most compelling evidence that there is. It's called grade A. Well, that is what the Neurological Health Foundation did. So, for example, they took all the studies they could find on vitamin D, improving outcomes or reducing risk in pregnancy, and that's what this document has. So, a lot of what comes next is pulled from the research that's in this document. And the thing is, it gives such empowering tools to you as to parents or parents to be. So, we're going to get into some of the broad topics that they looked at. They researched, hey, what if people take prenatal vitamins before conception? Does that have any impact on pregnancy health and maternal health? Well, guess what they found? Maternal folate supplementation around conception was associated with a 39% lower risk of autism disorder. Just that one intervention. The good news is we can use more than one at the same time. Prenatal vitamin use was associated with a 45% risk reduction in preeclampsia risk. What did we list as the top 3 threats to healthy birth? That's one of them. Healthy weight women taking multivitamins had up to a 71% reduction in preeclampsia risk compared to overweight women not taking vitamins. And then starting prenatal vitamins before conception helps to reduce birth complications and supports early fetal brain and spinal cord development. Prenatal supplementation reduced risk of preterm delivery by more than 400% in some studies. So we can see quite obviously here that taking vitamins, and it doesn't even specify necessarily which ones, we'll get a little bit more into that here in a moment, that just taking vitamins alone has a huge impact on outcomes in pregnancy and in children's health. Let's look at vitamin D. Vitamin D is very important, and most of you have heard about it. So let's look at some statistics and research highlights. So having low vitamin D levels doubled the risk of preeclampsia. Maternal vitamin D insufficiency nearly doubled the risk of language impairment in children. Infants with vitamin D insufficiently were up to 10 times more likely to have peanut allergy and 9 times more likely to have multiple food allergies. Vitamin D supplementation during infancy was associated with a 29% reduction in type 1 diabetes risk. These are very important statistics. Even though the numbers might not seem huge to you, they are really, really important when you multiply that out over hundreds and millions of pregnancies and children every year. So some of the important findings were that adequate vitamin D reduced childhood eczema and food allergies, and that we actually have a goalpost we're what we're shooting for. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to take something and hope it works. We want to get to a certain level. So vitamin D levels of approximately 40 on your blood test, 40 units per ml, in the third trimester of pregnancy were associated with a 47% of preterm birth. That's almost 50% just by having adequate vitamin D levels. So that's easy. Anyone can do that. So for vitamin D, the practical recommendation is that we recommend testing levels of vitamin D and supplementing it if marginal or low. Now, the bottom of the reference range is 30. So 30 to 100 is the reference range. You don't want to be sitting at 31 or 32. Now, your doctor might look at your 31 or 32 level and say, hey, you're normal, but you don't want, that's not the normal you want. You want to be optimized. And so to be optimized, you need to be above 50. We actually want people between 60 and 80, ideally. But definitely you don't want to be sitting at the bottom of the range. And then just because your doctor says you're normal, you don't do anything about it. So a tip for everyone is when you get lab tests done, ask for the test, get the copies of the test. Don't just accept, hey, everything's normal, because again, in this situation, you could be normal, but still not in a good place. So another part of the study in this body of evidence was that when mothers who were breastfeeding took 4,000 IU of vitamin D, they were able to sustain an adequate amount of circulating vitamin D, where if you took less than that, it did not. So there are a lot of different doses out there. You can get 400 IU, you can get 800 IU, you can get 1,000 IU, but it took 4,000 and above to make a significant notable difference. So doses under that were not sufficient. So another recommendation is that as human beings, as creations by God on this planet, we are supposed to be outside. We need to see the sun, and a lot of life keeps us inside. So get outside, spend time outside. It helps your vitamin D production as well as being good for your soul. Let's move to the next nutrient. Let's move to iron. So iron supports oxygen delivery. It supports brain development, energy, and healthy growth during pregnancy and childhood. So here are some of the stats. Iron supplementation significantly reduced both the anemia of the mother and her iron deficiency in a meta-analysis of 49 studies. So that's studying 49 different studies and coming to conclusions about that. Iron supplementation reduced low birth weight from 17% to 4%. Just so you know how much that is, that's by 75% change. So sometimes we look at low numbers and we think, yeah, that's not significant. Yeah, it is. It's a 75% reduction just by supplementing with iron. Iron supplementation reduced preterm low birth weight, meaning children born early having low birth weight. That decreased from 10% to 3% in a study. That is a 70% change. So again, what are the risks that we're facing that are miscarriage, premature birth, low birth weight? These are ways, we've just talked about two nutrients here. And infants born to anemic mothers had an 81% rate of anemia themselves during infancy. So ways that we can manage this, routine lab testing can easily detect low iron status while it can still be corrected. And the effects of not correcting it and having iron deficiency in infancy can impact cognition, behavior, and motor function even 10 years after the deficiency is corrected. So not only is this easily correctable, but it is a big, big deal if you didn't get on it when you should have, because it can affect a child for a very long time. So practical recommendations for iron sufficiency: monitor the iron levels through blood testing and do it at more than one point during pregnancy, because anemia is it's a common occurrence for pregnant women. And it's a common occurrence even going into pregnancy, because a lot of women were losing blood through menstrual cycles, and we may not realize that we've been borderline anemic. And then all of a sudden, all this demand comes for nutrients and iron and other minerals when the fetus is developing. And now all of a sudden it pushes us over the edge into over anemia. So eat iron-rich foods, including red meat, spinach, beans, and lentils. Pair iron foods with vitamin C to improve absorption, and avoid taking any iron supplements with calcium-rich foods like milk. You want to split those apart. So you take your iron-rich foods or iron supplements at one end of the day and your calcium supplements and foods at the other end. Okay, Thyroid is a huge, huge factor here. So thyroid dysfunction and hypothyroidism. A large meta-analysis, again, studying the studies, 47,000 women who were pregnant found that subclinical hypothyroidism increased the risk of preterm birth by almost a third. Isolated low T4, T4 is one of your thyroid hormones, just having that be low increased the risk by about almost 50%. Thyroid autoantibodies being present increased the risk by about a third, and inadequately treated overt hypothyroidism was associated with miscarriage in up to 60% of pregnancies studied. So it has a very, very big role here. Thyroid hormone is critically important for fetal brain development, especially during the first trimester when the fetus relies heavily on maternal thyroid hormone. Now, women, we may not know we're pregnant during the first trimester. Some of us didn't know until we were 3 months or beyond. This is a critical time. So if you're thinking about becoming pregnant, this is something you would want to have monitored. Maternal hypothyroidism has been associated with impaired neurodevelopment, lower childhood IQ scores, and developmental delay. Also with neonatal respiratory distress, low birth weight, and fetal growth restriction. And after birth, there is a condition in children called cretinism, which was basically a product of very low iodine in the diet, in the food supply, in certain areas where it had been basically removed from soil over agriculture and overgrowing certain crops. So it's associated with certain regions, such as the Appalachian Mountains. That's the reason why they iodized salt. So they put iodine into salt for the purpose of avoiding thyroid insufficiency. So, how would we manage thyroid performance for healthy pregnancy? Well, get tested as soon as you know if you're pregnant or if you are planning to be. Optimal ranges are not the same as normal ranges, and I can't stress that enough when it comes to blood testing. Normal ranges are averages based on population trends. They do not, just because it's normal does not mean that it's healthy or ideal. So your doctor telling you that you're normal does not necessarily mean that you're healthy. What's normal today is to not be healthy. So we want to be something different from normal. So here is a table that compares the conventional thyroid reference, the optimal reference ranges. So if the conventional is on the left, the optimal is in the middle. The most important number here is the last one. It's the free T3, where I put a yellow mark. Free T3 is the active thyroid hormone. It is what goes out and gets the job done. The T4 is the storage form of that hormone. Your thyroid gland normally mostly just produces the T4, then it goes out into the body and your body activates it when it needs it. If you have inflammation, if you have toxicity, if you have a lot of stress in your life from different causes, your body doesn't do a very good job of converting it. And so you can be functionally underperforming with your thyroid, even though the thyroid gland is doing everything that it's supposed to do. So most important, and the one that we look at most when we're treating, is that free T3. You could have everything else be normal, but if that free T3 is low, you are hypothyroid practically, and that's where it really matters. So again, when you get lab tests, you need to see them and you need to know what those numbers are, not just whether you're normal. So the importance of a whole food diet is going to be our next subject. Again, this is still pulling from the research consensus that I pointed to a few slides ago. So a balanced diet rich in vegetables, fruits, proteins, and healthy fats supports fetal growth and lowers pregnancy risks. The research highlights are that balanced protein and calorie supplementation significantly reduce stillbirth and neonatal death risk. Mediterranean style diets reduced persistent wheezing and allergic conditions in kids. Daily intake of sweetened beverages with artificial sweeteners was associated with preterm birth risk. And Western style diets in general, high in processed foods, were associated with higher odds of induced preterm birth. We have a lot of toxins in the food supply. Children with higher pesticide metabolite levels had approximately twice the rate of ADHD, but organic diets reduced pesticide metabolites to nearly undetectable levels in children, so it was an effective intervention. Women consuming organic vegetables during pregnancy had a 21% lower risk of preeclampsia. Prenatal pesticide exposure was associated with a 60% increased risk of autism spectrum disorder in one of the studies done. So, conventional produce is a major source of pesticide exposure, as is conventionally raised meat and dairy. Remember that animals concentrate. And so, whatever animals are taking in, they're going to concentrate. So, whenever you eat animal products such as milk, there's going to be more of it in there. Toxic metal exposure. This is a really big deal for all neurodevelopmental issues. So lead, mercury, arsenic, and other toxic metals cause impaired neurologic development. Higher toxic metal exposure has been strongly linked with developmental and behavioral concerns. Pregnancy increases our vulnerability to these toxins. And many people are exposed to low levels in their water, soil, and air. If you live near an agricultural field where things get sprayed, if you live near factories, if you live near different industries or industrial areas, you can have greater exposures of these things. So, some practical recommendations are to avoid high mercury seafood, avoid old paint, contaminated water, and research your cosmetics. Know what you're putting on your face. Just because it's mineral, well, guess what? Lead is a mineral. So is mercury, so is arsenic, so is cadmium. And a lot of these minerals could be in your mineral cosmetics. Choose safer household cleaning products. Wash your hands frequently and avoid unnecessary exposures from hobbies and occupations. So that could be painting your crafts, your making pottery and things like that. These sometimes can be inadvertent exposures that you didn't know about. So you need to know what materials you're using, even if it's something fun that you're doing. So, practical recommendations for reducing toxins consumed. Prioritize organic produce for the dirty dozen fruits and vegetables. Wash everything thoroughly. Choose organic dairy and animal products whenever possible. And focus first on the stuff you eat most is the stuff you should focus on getting organic. So if you only have raspberries a couple times a month, then that might not be the most important thing as if you had them all the time. So prioritize, if funds are limited, prioritize what you eat the most. Avoid GMO foods. So GMO foods are restricted or banned in more than 60 countries in the world due to safety concerns, but they're not banned here. That should tell us something. Research reviews have identified concerns related to our gut, the way it affects our immune system, our allergic response, and our digestive health. When they study animals fed GMO foods, they find all kinds of issues with the animals, and some animals don't even thrive when they're fed GMO foods. So, so that is partly why a lot of countries won't let animals be fed GMO foods because they're concerned about what that does to the flesh and the milk and the eggs and that then we consume. So, and again, the other issue with that is that there's more pesticide and herbicide use on GMO foods than there is on organic or even conventional raised foods. So, good thing is that if you're trying to avoid toxins and GMOs, you're probably going to get the double whammy there because things that are organic are also going to be non-GMO. So, read your ingredient level labels carefully and look and see what ingredients are there that either say they're non-GMO. If it's an organic product, the labeling usually will say it on front. If it doesn't say it, then it should assume that it is not. Focus on whole, minimally processed foods, reduce consumption of heavily processed packaged foods, and consider alternatives to wheat products and the dirty dozen. Wheat is one of the most heavily treated products or crops in the world with glyphosate. And not only are people reactive to some of the proteins in wheat, such as gluten, but the glyphosate coming right along with it makes it even worse. And consider growing your own produce when you can, because that makes life easy, it's fun, and it's extremely nutritious. So I'm getting to the end here, some concerns over eating seafood. This is one of those areas that's just really sad because when God created seafood, it was a good, healthy thing. And fortunately, us polluting the world has made it a really tricky thing. So, in a study of 2,000 pregnant women, DHA supplementation, which is coming from fish oil, is really beneficial because it lowered rates of preterm birth and low birth weight. Mothers taking in DHA was associated with improved infant vision and their attention and problem solving skills. Omega-3 intake overall was associated with longer gestation and healthier birth weight. So, fish oil is a really good thing. However, there are some problems because a lot of the fish on the oceans that they swim in are contaminated. If they're farm raised, they're often very much getting bad things to eat that have toxins in them, or they're in water that has a lot of pollution in it. So, high mercury fish negatively affects neurologic development and maternal health. So you want to choose low mercury seafood. Anything you catch yourself is going to be low metal. Like if you're in a stream or your husband's fishing or someone's fishing. So salmon, trout, and freshwater fish are generally safe. They're not going to have the heavy metals. Once you get into the Great Lakes and oceans, the chance of them having lived in water with toxins increases. Avoid high mercury fish such as shark, swordfish, king mackerel, and tilefish, and take a purified omega-3 supplement. Water, a lot of water. I'll summarize this slide. Your water coming out of your tap is probably not very pure. Water out of water bottles has a lot of the plastic toxins and plasticizers, plus whatever was in the water that in the pipes that it came from. So the EPA and the Environmental Working Group have identified that almost all of the water systems that they studied had problems. So I think I remember in Chicagoland that the Environmental Working Group was analyzing water systems in the suburbs where we lived for copper, for lead, for different things. Basically, what they found was that every one that they analyzed had contaminants in them. So here's a table that has some of the major contaminants in US drinking water. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that other than to say, here are the things you need to be doing to make your water safer. So drink filtered water, use osmotic filters, reverse osmosis, even a Brita filter is better than nothing. Choose glass bottles and avoid plastic, and test your home water so that you know what's in it. It might be okay, but you want to know if it isn't. And then avoid sugary drinks and those artificial sweeteners, things that you add, those Mio drops or whatever they are, the little water additives. Don't use those because they're full of artificial garbage. Okay, round to the home stretch here, supporting the gut with probiotics. So research suggests that probiotics, when the mothers use them, may reduce childhood eczema and allergy risk. Gut bacteria strongly influences early immune system development, and healthy maternal microbiome diversity is associated with improved digestive and immune outcomes in infants. And those of you who have been pregnant before probably have heard some of the microbiome, because we know that when babies pass through the birth canal as opposed to being taken out by C-section, that the birth canal actually inoculates the infant with beneficial microbes, which make up a huge part of their immunity. So there's no way to replace that if a child is born by C-section versus coming out through the vaginal canal. But taking oral probiotics is a way to do more than nothing, and it is a good idea. So here are some natural ways to improve the internal flora. Include fermented foods such as yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi. Now this is for mom. This is not, we don't give these to babies until they're quite a bit older. Increase dietary fiber from vegetables and fruits. Discuss probiotic supplementation with your healthcare provider, and really, really try to avoid antibiotics whenever possible. So, an important note about prenatal vitamins. Don't expect that one product can do it all. There's no way to get all the different substances into one product. One, they don't mix well. Two, it would be too bulky for it to be in one thing. So no matter what, you're going to have to use more than one thing. And it's actually better if they don't try to fit everything in one, because some things don't, like the oils and some of the minerals or the powders or things that can turn rancid or not turn rancid, it isn't good if they're all forced into one. So expect to supplement with several nutrients in addition to your prenatal to achieve the needed levels each day. If nausea is an issue, and it is for some women, look for food-based liquid alternatives, or split it up between meals, and always take them with a meal because that will help the nausea issue. So strangely enough, some vitamins will cause nausea if you take them on an empty stomach, but the same vitamins will help with nausea if you're able to get them down. And some of the B vitamins are known for one, they're going to irritate your stomach if there's no food in it, but if you can take them, it will actually help with the morning sickness induced nausea. So definitely expect that you're going to need to take more than one thing. Now, these next three slides again have the RDA levels for prenatal vitamins, or what women need to take when they're pregnant, with the optimal functional ranges. And of course, there's going to be a difference. So remember that the RDA, recommended daily allowance, that is the minimum amount needed to prevent diseases of deficiency. So if you go below a certain level of vitamin C, you're going to get scurvy. So the RDA is just that minimal amount that you need to have every day to not get scurvy. So we want to do better than just that. We want to optimize, like I said before. So this range on the right-hand side, that's what you're shooting for. Your prenatal vitamin is probably not going to have those amounts of everything. It may have some, but it may not have all. So this list is helpful because it helps you know, hey, I need more folate than what is in my prenatal, or I need more calcium, or I need more vitamin D, and I need to go, put together a few other things to get my prenatal, the total amount that I'm taking up to where I should be. So that this is the next slide. And again, this is here for your reference. This slide deck will be property of Motherwell when we're done here. And what I wanted to say is there have been a couple of apps that were prenatal vitamin rating apps out. I tried to find one for you. The Neurological Health Foundation used to have one, but it wasn't supported anymore. So some of you, I don't know if anyone knows that there is one that works well. Just remember that they may have an app that rates it, but I don't know what they're using to compare it to. So if they're comparing it to the RDA, then that's not going to be what we want. We want the optimal ranges. Now, the last couple slides of this talk, I want to talk about folate because folate has become super important and it's something that's been in the news a lot in the last year. So let's talk a little bit more about folate. So the right forms really matter. And most of you probably know that folate, and you used to hear it being called folic acid, prevented neural tube defects and was always going to be in a multivitamin given to pregnant women. Well, what they did then is they came out with a synthetic form called folic acid, which was much cheaper to produce, and they put that in all the prenatal vitamins. Turns out now that wasn't such a good idea. So synthetic folic acid appears to actually be blocking the folate receptors, and it may interfere with folate transport in some people, and it may also be involved with the rising autoimmune condition whereby antibodies form to the folate receptor. So for this reason, vitamins given to moms and pretty much given to everybody, but especially moms and especially kids, need to contain the natural forms. And those are going to be called, you'll see L-methylfolate. You might see folinic acid, which is not the same thing as folic acid, even though there's only 2 letters difference in that name, or 5-methylfolate. So these are the ingredients that you're looking for when it comes to your folate. So research studies show that close to 80% of kids with developmental delay have this autoimmune condition where antibodies are blocking and binding the folate receptor. It's now being discovered that adults also have this condition. And so in our think tanks at TACA, where they talk about this issue, they're finding that more and more and more people, more and more kids, more and more adults actually have this autoimmune condition, and that folic acid may have played a role in triggering it. So for this reason, it should be avoided in all age groups. So some of you may have heard the word leucovorin. If you have any kids with special needs, you've certainly heard it this last year. It hit the news. It's the rage, it's the controversy, all of that. Why? Well, because folate supports the metabolism of DNA and RNA, which is how you get the genetic material that makes your cells. You need DNA in order to make each cell. Folate supports the development of the brain and the neural tube. Folate metabolism is involved in brain chemistry. And in this autoimmune condition, cerebral folate deficiency, these kids have antibodies blocking and binding the brain's folate receptors. Well, we said that folic acid was probably involved or potentially involved in being a trigger for that. But cow's milk proteins are also a major trigger of this immune response. And once it has been triggered, it doesn't matter whether it's cow's milk, goat's milk, mammal's milk, it doesn't matter what milk it is. If it's a mammal's milk, the autoimmune antibodies are being made to these protein sequences. And so you'll have low folate in the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain, but it will be high in the blood because it can't get through the doors to get into the brain. So this condition has we've been researching it for a long time, but for some reason it reached a critical mass and it is now known to the whoever the autism community, not the autism community, but the committee that was formed to advise Congress and to hopefully have some impact in advising medical decision making as it pertains to children. So because of that, it's highly controversial. Anything that has to do with autism and developmental disorders is considered to be highly controversial. So unfortunately, there are doctors who are embracing it and there are doctors who are opposing it. The good thing is that folate is a natural over-the-counter supplement, so you can get your hands on it. So cerebral folate deficiency is the name of the disorder. It is prevalent we think about 80% of children with autism and developmental delay actually have this going on. So symptoms of cerebral folate deficiency really look like symptoms of autism, motor delay, speech difficulties, sleep issues, irritability and anxiety, and seizures. And treatment options include prescriptions. So leucovorin is the prescription. That's the one that hit the news. Deplin is another one. Elimination of dairy from the diet because mammal's milk triggers the release of these antibodies, and high dose over the counter folinic acid and folate, not folic acid. So, folate based therapies, according to the research now, should be the first line defense at the first sign of developmental delay. And that means if it occurs at 3 months, at 6 months, at 9 months, it doesn't matter. Rather than waiting till over 3 years until you can finally get an appointment with early intervention and then get a diagnosis, this should be started ASAP. And because it's so prevalent, it should be treated presumptively at the very first sign of developmental delay. Dose is based on weight and does not pose a toxic risk. So, what's the worst? Let's say that you didn't actually need to do it. Well, nothing bad happens. So, this approach would probably improve developmental outcomes and reduce morbidity in affected individuals. Why? Because we would have gotten their brains back online earlier before they missed their developmental windows for so long. The good news is over the counter options are available and easy to use. So I'll leave you with this last slide. Here are some helpful websites for young parents. So I've got the P2I website, the Neurological Health Foundation, Weston Price, which is kind of nice because it gives you a lot of healthy eating ideas. And then takanow.org, that is the most amazing resource for parents if you have children with developmental delay. So hopefully that isn't any of you, but if it is, that's an awesome resource. One more thing I want to say about the Neurological Health Organization. Some of these websites haven't been maintained very well for a while, as I found when I was on them trying to pull information. The Neurological Health Foundation has they call it a summit, but you can subscribe to it. It's $37 to subscribe to it, but then you have access to a whole bunch of different presentations that people did, that doctors did, that scientists did, that are on many, many topics of interest. So I just wanted to put that out there that that's a possibility. So I believe that I am done, and I'm going to stop screen sharing now, unless Rebecca, you tell me not to do it.
Oh, yeah, you can stop screen sharing. That's totally fine.
Okay.
Thank you. That was such a great presentation and so informative and really in depth. I have a whole list of questions, especially those last few slides.
Okay.
But I also would love to open the floor. So anybody who's watching, if you would like to either just unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to do that. Or if you don't feel comfortable talking, type it into the Q&A chat, which I think is at the bottom of your screen. So, my first question was, you mentioned vitamins a lot and supplements, and I know whenever I was pregnant, your doctor is going to say, like, go take a multivitamin, and you mentioned, one's not enough. And I know that my doctor never gave me like, hey, here's the ones you should take, or, take them separately. Um, and one of the things that we want to do at Motherwell is really talk about like what are the brands you trust. And even if it's like ones that you recommend to your patients, if you have some that you could discuss, and I'm happy to share like what I've liked as well.
Sure. So I actually there are so many different ones out there that I think what might be more helpful is if I put together a short list and I send that to you as a resource
Yep.
for Motherwell. The thing is that all of them are going to be slightly different. So there are a lot of good companies out there. There are even some good multi-level companies out there if you're into that kind of a thing. And so it's not that there aren't good options available. It's just that you have to, that's why I gave you the slides so that you could compare the nutrient levels because they'll all be a little bit different. So for one, you might not need to supplement any additional calcium, but if you take this other one, you do. So that's you just have to go into it knowing what you're shooting for and then what the product you like. Some are food-based, some aren't. I tend to like food-based more. You could even use like some of the good multivitamins for women in general do a really good job of approximating almost everything, but you would then need to maybe pull in some extra folate, things like that.
Yeah, I watched a really funny TikTok recently of this older lady who probably hadn't really done her research. And so she thought more was better and was just like popping vitamins like they were candy. And it wasn't good quality vitamins either. It was like Flintstones. And
Oh
so
gosh.
I know. So she's like 5 in the morning, and then every time she had a sweet craving, she'd go eat one, and then in the evening again. And then she ended up with like her blood work just going crazy. So I was curious, like, at what point do you feel like if you're taking high doses of vitamins and maybe you're doing it outside your doctor's purview? So, like, if you have a OBGYN who isn't really well versed in that sort of thing, but you read your own labs and you say, okay, I need more of this vitamin. Is there any specific ones that you would be like, hey, these should probably be under observation. You need to get labs done. What would those be?
Yeah, I wish I was still screen sharing because I could back up and show you on the
You can pop
slides.
it up.
But
Yeah, why don't you pop it up again? Can you?
um that might be, hang on. Well, let me just answer and then
Yeah.
I'll see if I can pop it up. So vitamin A is one of the ones that can become toxic. Now, here's the thing, the likelihood of you getting yourself toxic with vitamin A, it's not very high unless you really went out of your way to do it. But selenium, there are a few of them that could be toxic, not many. You don't hear about too many people having vitamin related toxicity ER visits. You hear it all the time about simple things that you can take, like Tylenol or ibuprofen, or stuff that you could actually kill yourself on in your own home tonight if you really wanted to. So the likelihood of it is not super high. It's more that if your kids got into something or your dog ate your bottle, that's more of the cause of the incidents. Um, Generally, I recommend you getting blood tests for vitamin D and for your iron levels. And there are some other there's iron levels, and then there's another test that generally we do with it called ferritin, which is your iron storage. Um, the rest of the vitamins we don't usually supplement based on blood labs. But if you have a multivitamin overall, and you have a comparison that I gave you for pregnancy specific needs, if you aim for that, you're going to be pretty good. Even if you don't have blood tests, but I think I've presented compelling evidence for certain things that you should blood test, such as your thyroid, your iron, and your vitamin D, because they're so critical, so easy to correct, and so bad if you don't get enough.
Yeah, I know that I did a lot of that testing whenever I was younger, just trying to figure out, what was wrong with me. And one of the things that I struggled with was, okay, I've gotten these blood tests, but now what do I do? Would you have a recommendation for like if you're going to let's say you don't have a functional medicine doctor, like that's something that's brand new in your world, and you only have an OBGYN or your family practice doctor, what would you do or what would you recommend for somebody who's kind of they've tested, they have these numbers, but they don't know what to do with them?
So we have our own algorithms, I guess. So, for example, if you are for vitamin D, we would give you 1,000 IU of vitamin D for every 10 points that we're trying to raise it in your blood. So let's just say we needed to raise it 10 points, we'd give you 1,000 IU. Um, if I was a person and I did not trust my medical doctor to be involved, then you can do a couple things. You get your tests, get your blood tests, and then you see what you're starting at, and then you can supplement. Now, generally, if you aren't taking any supplements and you go to the store, you take the recommended dose that's on the product that you buy. There's a lot of information available online as well. So I don't think people have no access to any information, but we always retest. So, because we don't know if the dose you choose to take or the dose that's on that bottle that you bought, is that going to be enough? It's not usually going to be too much because what's on a bottle is dosed for safety. Like they're not going to give you a toxic dose if you're taking what's on the bottle per its instructions. The bigger problem is that you might not get enough. And so generally we would put someone on a regimen, test them again in 2 months and see if we hit the target. I've never had to go down except maybe in a couple cases where we were giving high doses of zinc for an immune problem, and then we had to take it back a little bit. So, we don't typically run blood tests for like B12 or folate or these others. Again, there's no toxicity with those. And we also don't even run tests for vitamin A generally, even though that one could be toxic. If you stay below 10,000 IU, if you're taking it day in and day out, you're unlikely to become toxic.
Okay. Yeah, it was interesting as you're talking. I was like literally following my medical background. I'm like, oh, that's why, and that's why, and that's why. So like after my first child, which of course you knew, uh, I don't remember if you were treating Nick as a baby. I don't think so. I think it was a bit too early. But
Yeah,
after him, I had so many complications with him. I had preeclampsia. I had a very traumatic experience with birth with him. And then I was seeing a different chiropractor at the time, and I did get my vitamin D checked, and my levels were 12. So like when you're like they're directly correlated, I'm like, yeah, I'm living proof. Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, and it took, I think, several years before my blood tests came back normal again, and that was with supplementation. And I think I was taking like 10,000 a day because I didn't know what a good range
Yeah.
was.
And see, now we know that there are some genetic combinations where it takes, some people will get their levels up fairly easily. They don't need super high doses of a vitamin D especially. But some people with different genetic combinations, you could take it and it just feels like you're doing nothing. And that's
Yeah,
probably your
probably why.
situation.
Yes, and I can see family trends where that's the case. Um, and I don't want to talk all the time, so I'll give a little opening if anybody else has a question. All right, so um, let's see. I went through that one. Okay, so when you were going through your last few slides, which I found really interesting, I had not heard about, I'm not on the news. I just don't read, I don't watch it or read it or anything. But I found it really interesting. And again, going back to my family's medical history, so my younger brother was born with Down syndrome, very severe, turns out. And then later on, he was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. He's barely verbal. He's like 29 years old. But whenever he was a baby, he was having severe grand mal seizures. He
Mm.
had almost zero muscle tone. My mom had to like actually feed him with a syringe
Wow.
until he was about 8 months old
Wow.
because he didn't have any muscle tone in his mouth at all. And she entered into this program with Rice University, which is in Houston, that they were testing that vitamin B thing. And I think I don't remember the dosage at all, except that the treatment that they had her testing him for the seizures was not enough. And she was like, I feel like this needs to be much higher. And so she asked them to like 10 times the dose. And they were like really hesitant. And she's like, she was a nurse. And so she's like, I feel like I know what I'm doing. And she gave it to him, and his seizures were cured, and they've never come back. And
That
it's
is
crazy.
awesome.
It was just vitamin B12, but then the connections with the folate and the milk, like I can see siblings, like my younger siblings who all have, I think, some of those triggers. And probably whenever my mom was pregnant, I don't know at what point do you know if it switched from the folate to the folic acid in the supplementation, or is that too
That's a good
early?
question, and we could probably look that up, or someone could ask Chat GPT and find the actual date. But it's interesting how we sometimes we try to do something good for the
Hmm.
population, but it can backfire, and that's happened over and over. So there are some doctors out there who campaign that when the reason that we have so much autoimmune thyroid disorder is linked to when they put iodine in salt. Now they did that
Yeah.
for a good reason. They did it because people were having children with cretinism because they were hypothyroid. They had huge goiters. I mean, you can
Wow.
look back in history books and see those pictures because the soil was so depleted from too much agriculture, especially in the poorer areas in this country. But in so doing, accidentally, it created other problems. And that's been true of fluoride, putting fluoride in the water supply. Fluoride's very toxic. Um, and so now we have the same thing with, a synthetic form of folate. Well, our bodies aren't made to do good with synthetic things. And so I don't know the timing of it, but there's the folic acid can interfere with folate transport. So it now is being found that it's a problem and we shouldn't take it at all, not anybody. How long do you think it'll take that recommendation to change in the American Academy of Pediatrics or, obstetrics? It's probably going to take a while, but research hits and understanding changes long before official recommendations are ever changed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going back to the iodine, I just had a thought. A long time ago, I switched away from your typical table salt to using pink salt, which of course does not have iodine included in it. Do you know or recommend if I should take iodine supplementation on top of it, or is pink salt naturally have enough occurring that we don't have to worry about it?
No, it doesn't. And that's another area of a debate. You find that a lot of like health, even between functional medical practitioners, there's debates between what's helpful and what's not helpful. So in the iodine thing, that is very hotly debated where, and you know what, it could be doing both. It could be both that we don't have enough of it in some situations when we need to get some additionally, but the fact that it was added to salt the way it was has also triggered autoimmunity.
Oh,
Though they both could be true at the same time. So no, the pink salt or sea salt may not have any iodine in it at all. So in general, we need to seek iodine-rich foods. Food is the best way to get it. The problem is you can't measure it in food, so you don't actually know if that food may or may not have it anymore. And so the best way to do iodine is probably through a balanced multivitamin or multi-mineral supplement where it's there in a kind of a low quantity. Um, there are doctors who really, really go to town with high doses of iodine supplementation. I would just say I don't know enough about it to be able to safely feel like I'm safe in recommending really high doses because I don't work with that and they seem to be extremely deep into iodine specifically.
yeah. I know I've taken other like things for thyroid that has iodine in it, but it's been
Yeah.
inconsistent and I haven't really noticed a benefit or lack
Yeah,
like with
it's
myself.
apparently, I mean, I think we do need some. Apparently, iodine deficiency is strongly linked to breast cancer. It's not just thyroid function. It's like
Mm.
many tissues and many systems need iodine. The thyroid is kind of like the canary in the coal mine that suffers first. But a lot of the doctors who are really, like I said, the ones who are really, really fanatically uh, encouraging us to take high doses of iodine are ones that are treating breast cancer. And they do have some compelling links. Like I said, I just the amounts they're saying to take are really high, and I want to know more before I would
Yeah,
do it or recommend it.
that makes sense. We have a really great question in the chat, and I think it also has a follow-up question that I'll ask if it doesn't come up. The question is, will a thyroid problem in a man also affect the baby's development?
This is one of the places where men get off the hook. That the rest of the stuff we get to blame them all the time, but men get off the hook in this one. So generally, a man's health problem is not communicated to the child. Um, Now, if they have a genetic problem, obviously that could be communicated through genetics. But if a man has a given health problem or an autoimmune disease himself, he's not communicating that actual health problem to the child. The mother's immune system is what is shared with the child. So what she has going on is going to have much greater impact. Um, so the answer is no. Obviously, the man should get treated for his own sake, but that's not going to directly affect his child.
Is there, I've had friends who have done like a detox before they want to get pregnant, and both a husband and wife do it.
Yeah.
Have you seen or have you heard of any way that fertility even could be impacted for the man if they are detoxing?
Absolutely. And so there's a lot of information on the declining sperm count in men, even young men, there's an epidemic of it. Now, my focus has been women and children, so I haven't done much on male health, especially male sexual health. There's a whole realm of describing how testosterone levels in men have dropped. They used to be, let's say 1,000 units. Now they're floating around, 300 to 400 units. And so that also is going to have effect on fertility, on sperm production, on libido. The sperm count, and I wish I'd prepared on the statistics because there are statistics on that out there, but it's quite compelling. And not only are the sperm count declining, but they're also not, there more of them are misshapen or malformed.
Mm,
So, and those things are the endocrine disrupting toxins that are very specific. And there are some that have an affinity for the testes or they call them germ cells that are going to make the sperm cells. And so you can get, and a lot of the pregnancy loss, early pregnancy loss is attributed to that you
wow.
have an imperfect sperm cell that happens to fertilize an egg, but it's not compatible with life.
Yeah.
So yes, the men are being affected just as the women are. It shows up different. Women tend to break down more into autoimmunity. Men tend to be more affected by like heart disease and things that they don't pay attention to until it like either kills them or makes them really, really, really sick. Women and children, we tend to pay attention to it sooner overall, just as some generalizations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had a question and I've forgotten it for a second. Um,
It'll come to you.
I hope so. It was a good question. Um, oh my goodness, what was it? I should have written it down. We were talking about male fertility.
Testosterone levels, sperm count.
Um, mhm. And then, oh my goodness. Well, I'll look for another question
That's okay.
if I don't remember it. Um, so the question I had written, it's not the one I forgot, but an earlier question was going back to the folate. Um, you mentioned it can be triggered by cow's milk, um, but is it triggered only as a child and it affects creates an autoimmune disorder, or these things can be triggered as adults as well?
So that's a great question and a great clarification. So what, again, this is something it's a developing and emerging research, and it's been going on now for quite some time. So we've used folate in very high doses to treat kids with developmental delay for the entire time that I've been doing this. So I've been in this for about 20 years. But the research now is starting to show the prevalence of the antibodies. And so there are blood tests that can be gotten. They're $200 and they test for the folate receptor binding antibodies. So it is as more and more information, more and more tests are collected and compiled, what they've realized is that now they believe it's affecting 80%. And I don't know, 5 years ago, they thought it was affecting 30% of children. Well, as they test more kids, as people in general test more kids, we're seeing that it's occurring much more frequently than we thought. And so your question was, do they think that it's happened? Your question had to do with the milk proteins. I may be
Triggering it.
butchering your question. So what they think is triggering it is a combination of things, right? Because it's an autoimmune condition, and so you have multiple things that can pull the autoimmune trigger. But there are certain protein sequences in milk, in mammals' milk, that are really, really, really high in cow's milk. And so cow's milk, unlike human milk, has a lot more of this particular protein sequence. And so what they think is happening is that when a child is introduced to mammal's milk, or when an adult is introduced to cow's milk, that they start to form these antibodies. If the mother has it, the baby shares her immune system. So the baby will be born with this autoimmune condition, which can express when it is fed cow's milk or formula.
Okay.
So they are now doing research on the connection between these folate receptor antibodies and seizure disorders, and finding at this point that it seems like there's a one-on-one, one-to-one overlap. And the
Oh,
seizure disorders are responding favorably to being treated with high dose folate. Now, the only studies that have been done, this is another frustrating thing for me, is leucovorin. So leucovorin is a prescription folate in the form of folinic acid, and there's some different forms in which it occurs naturally, and there's basically two of them. The reason I'm frustrated is that only drug companies fund research because they've got the money to do it. So the research isn't performed with over-the-counter products, and that's the point of frustration. So the research that's been done is absolutely compelling, but they only used leucovorin as the treatment. They didn't use over-the-counter supplements that had the same ingredient. And so what we can say with authority is that leucovorin resolves this problem. We can't say that over-the-counter things because it wasn't proven by research, but it never will be funded. So that's the frustration.
yeah.
So the folate treatment is very effective, and it has to be pretty high dose if a child has or person has those antibodies. But there's a protocol for it, and when you get the levels high enough, the symptoms will resolve. So that is why it has become the number one intervention for a child with developmental delay.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure we'll continue hearing more of it. And I can't remember if we scheduled this until 8:15 or 8:30, but I couldn't remember my other question. So I would just love to
That's okay.
thank you so much,
You're
Julie,
welcome.
for the presentation and For the attendees watching, we will have this posted online on our Motherwell online. It'll probably take us a few weeks to get it edited and up, but Julie will also share your slides and then hopefully some of the resources as well. And we'll
Perfect.
email it out to everyone.
Perfect.
So
Thank you so much, all of you. And I love your mission. I love what you're doing. So keep it up and let's just work on building healthier bodies all
yes,
around.
yeah, and healthier babies. That's
Healthier
the hope.
babies, healthier mamas too.
Yep,
So,
exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much and hope everybody has a good evening and get some sleep.
all right. Take care,
All right,
everyone.
thanks. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.